Hello everyone, welcome to Lafayette Square in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm your cruise director, Kristen, and man is it good to be back talking to all of you about malls again. I went here on the same day I visited our last mall in Indianapolis, Washington Square, and since these two were once pretty close copies of each other, I figured it was good to do them back to back. Obviously, a lot has changed in here since then. This one is a few years older, opening in 1968 as the first enclosed mall in Indianapolis. It's also much closer to downtown and is only about 2 miles away from Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I didn't really get a lot of exteriors here, and that's because of the odd thing they've recently done with it. Lafayette Square was purchased last year by its newest owner, Perez Realty Corp., and they're currently working on giving the outside a facelift. They've actually blocked off a big portion of the parking lot while they do that. You can only drive about halfway around, which means that the areas you can park are actually pretty full. I really try hard not to make people uncomfortable when I'm out here making videos, and when you've got a busy parking lot where you kind of stick out a little and you've got out-of-state plates on your car, you don't want to come off like a creep. They recently have given the side of the mall that faces Lafayette Road a fresh coat of paint. On Google Street View, the mall is still a pretty standard old beige mall color, but they painted it gray and blue in the last couple months. You go around the corner and the new paint job sort of abruptly stops, so they're obviously not done with it yet. But you also can't go see the exteriors of some of the closed vintage anchors anymore because of that, and that was sort of disappointing. This mall is deceptively large, just like its cousin Washington Square. It's all one level, is about 1 million square feet, and has a whopping 6 anchor spaces. Unfortunately, only one anchor remains occupied today. When Lafayette Square opened in 1968, the mall held about 90 retailers, a single-screen General Cinemas location, and was anchored by JCPenney, Sears, G.C. Murphy, Kroger, and William H. Block. The first major update took place in 1974, when an additional anchor space was added in the form of Lazarus, along with a few additional inline tenants, and a year later the Kroger would be replaced by another department store, L.S. Ayres. The next anchor change would happen in 1987 when, just like at Washington Square, William H. Block was purchased by Lazarus, resulting in a redundancy. They sold the original Lazarus space to Montgomery Ward, and the former Block location became the new Lazarus. Throughout most of the 80s, Lafayette Square was the closest enclosed shopping mall to downtown Indianapolis and was where most people who lived in this part of the metro area shopped. Indianapolis, like most Midwestern cities, experienced a lot of suburban flight between the 70s and the 90s. People with more money moved to the outskirts where they could build big new houses with yards, and newer malls were built to accommodate where these new people lived. Inner suburbs, like where Lafayette Square sits, began to experience the effects of their more moneyed neighbors moving away. This seems to have culminated in what now reads as sort of a strange series of articles about teenagers hanging out at the mall that was published in 1993 in the Indianapolis Star. Mall owners and managers, including representatives of Lafayette Square, bemoaned that teenagers, in the new dark and intimidating grunge fashions, were starting to scare off well-heeled older patrons. There's a few things to unpack here. First of all, change out the descriptions of current fashions, and this article could have been written today about baby boomers being afraid of Gen Zers out and about without adult supervision. 1993 was close to the peak of teen mall culture. According to a study, at the time in the US, 55% of teenagers visited a local shopping mall at least once a week, spending an average of 3 hours and $35 on each visit. So that's a formidable demographic to sell to. So mall owners had a vested interest in not running all of these kids out because they were spending money while they were at the mall. But what to do about middle-aged empty nester Linda, who saw kids in ripped jeans and felt nervous about it? Security began keeping an eye on groups of louder, more boisterous teens, but did not adopt any kind of an escort policy, the sort of thing that became really popular 20 or 30 years later. Not everyone was bothered either. There was a quote from this absolute legend, 82-year-old Lonzo Mabry, who told reporters he came to Lafayette Square every Saturday to people watch and sit around, and said he was never bothered by teenagers and didn't feel uncomfortable at all. "I'm not afraid of anything. The only thing I'm afraid of is maybe a snake," he said. Maybe the mall needed more Lonzos. It wasn't just teenagers either, although they made for a convenient scapegoat. It was reported in the early 90s that property crimes like car break-ins and purse snatchings were on the rise in the area. These crimes were largely being perpetrated by adults, not teenagers. This sort of crime, and crime in general, reached an all-time high nationwide in the early 90s and has fallen nearly every year since. And there are so many theories about why this is, I would need an entire series of videos to name them all. Literally everything from increased nutrition to the banning of lead paint has been credited at least in part for the decrease in crime that began in the 90s that continues today. The point is, in the early 90s people were really concerned about crime, and rightfully so, because it was increasing nearly everywhere. It was during these years that Lafayette Square gained a nickname that it has struggled to shake ever since: Lafayette Scare. The mall's reputation was tarnished to the point that the regional president of DeBartolo's Indiana Mall Division wrote a letter to the editor of the Indianapolis Star paper to give his side of the story, including the fact that many of the crime incidents that were being reported as happening at the mall were actually happening in the surrounding area where it was out of their control. That regional president's name? Tony Orlando. There's no word on whether he had two assistants collectively named Don or not. The JCPenney here was an early closure, exiting the mall in 2003 along with Lazarus. The biggest single threat to the mall's health came in the mid-90s when Circle Center Mall opened in downtown Indianapolis. At opening, it was being positioned as extremely upscale, with a Nordstrom and a Parisian as anchors, and was now officially the closest mall to downtown. All this seems to have led to the decision to focus the Simon-funded 1997 to 1998 remodel on making the mall appear more kid and family friendly. If Circle Center was fancy and upscale, they were going to make this mall someplace you could take your kids without worrying about them breaking something expensive. They redid the food court in a NASCAR theme, paying homage to the nearby Indianapolis Motor Speedway. That remodel lasted until 2008 when the next owner, Ashkenazi Acquisitions Corp., toned down the whimsical family fun theme and made it look more like a normal mall again. Unfortunately, the early years of the financial crisis were pretty rough on Lafayette Square's anchor lineup, with the mall losing Sears, Macy's, and Steve & Barry's within a year of each other, along with a slew of national inline tenants. The area in which the mall sits was dubbed the International Marketplace because of the melting pot of immigrants that were opening businesses there, and the city of Indianapolis granted the mall $350,000 from its Community Redevelopment Fund to make improvements to its parking lot lights, security cameras, and landscaping to beautify the marketplace area. Even now, when you're driving in the area surrounding the mall, you'll find a colorful mix of all sorts of international restaurants on every corner, any country or region you could want. The grants and additional focus on the economics of the area did contribute to a reported drop in crime surrounding the mall as of 2015. But as I've said in other videos, sometimes old reputations have a way of sticking around even if the problem's on its way out. For people in outer suburbs whose neighborhoods were cornfields in the mid-90s, it's not a problem they ever really have to deal with, but some of these places are really trying their damnedest to make a new name for themselves. The feeling in this mall these days is a lot like Washington Square. It's mostly independently owned businesses, mom and pop places. It's maybe half full. It's really not doing horribly in terms of occupancy. They have a serious case of anchoritis though, and there's a really limited number of things that can fill those, especially the supersized ones from the 60s like these. There's only one open anchor here, and it's Shoppers World, which looks like it's in the vein of a Burlington or a Value City. It was actually pretty lively the day I was here, so it seems to fit the shoppers well. Lafayette Square was purchased by its newest owners last year, so there's a fresh set of eyes and ideas trying to figure out the best thing to do. Thank you for watching. Next time we'll finish off the Indianapolis trip with one last mall. Absolutely gorgeous, but struggling these days. Can you guess what it is? A very special thank you to all our patrons for helping make trips like this one possible, and if you'd like to become a patron, please see the link in the description. As always, I'm your cruise director, Kristen. This is UniComm Productions, and we'll see you next time.